Hello, team. Welcome to another ATP Geopolitics and Silicon Curtain co-stream with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce, and him over there, Jonathan Fink.
This one, partner in crime.
It's been too long. And I've literally just got in the door. My partner is very forgiving. I've just been away for 2 days in Dublin, and it was absolutely wonderful. My goodness, Jonathan, I have not been in so many pubs in 2 days as I have in the last 2 days.
It's time to sober up then, isn't
it? I've had. Turns out my partner can drink a lot of pints of Guinness as well. So I've never seen her put back so many pints of Guinness as well. So we were Guinnessing it up to the max. Had an absolutely wonderful time. Didn't do too much of the high culture, but did a lot of the proper real Dublin culture. And
high and low culture sort of meet very nicely in Ireland, don't they? And what is high culture anyway?
One of the pubs I was in, Toner's pub, actually, my partner got me a t-shirt because it was extraordinary. Right, Toner's pub, it's a really old pub. You go in and it's actually a museum as well. And so I can say, oh yeah, I went to museums. I went to this great museum and drank some Guinness. It's amazing. As it was effectively, it's a listed sort of building, and as it was, I don't know however many hundreds of years ago, just happening into these pubs that are just also cultural historical artifacts was brilliant. But anyway, enough of
the best kind. Yeah.
Well, yeah, quite.
I was going to say she's probably glad to see the back of you. So get into your man cave and do your Ukraine thing. I've had enough.
But what's been, I suppose, good in a way, I've not been looking at my phone and completely ensconced in the news, but also what's a shame as far as I'm concerned, and my kind of understanding of what I've been doing in reporting the war is that, and I think this has happened with me before, I go away and it's like record-breaking numbers of Shahed drones are thrown into Ukraine on a nightly basis. Yes. And so I then ended up having to do these just video recordings that Benny Pipe put together with some video behind. Images behind on a couple of the days, and that was kind of really useful to keep my finger on a pulse a little bit. But it's been an incredible few days, and you probably know a little bit more than me about what's been going on. I'm just looking at what Donald Trump's come out and said again tonight. I say again because he keeps saying like mental stuff, all stuff that we should just ignore. So we'll talk about that. What are your feelings over the last few days in terms of the war, in terms of the Shahed attacks that have been raining down on Ukraine?
Well, first of all, I mean, it's purely speculative to say, why Russia has chosen this particular point to do these, which are amongst the heaviest strikes of the entire war. Some of the most brutal, some of the most intense, and the fact that it's not a one-off, that it's sort of 3 nights in a row. This is systematic. None of this stuff happens by accident. What has not surprised me, what has disappointed me is some of the news headlines, including The Guardian. I mean, I'm expected to be disappointed by the BBC, but The Guardian had a particularly awful headline. And it's like, last year it was words such as, don't provoke Russia, etc., etc., which is ridiculous because, of course, Russia's the aggressor. The defender cannot be called provocative. And, we struggled with the kind of templated language which the media reached for, which has an underlying tone of appeasement. The headlines are the same here. Ukraine hit Moscow. Moscow retaliates. Again, you cannot retaliate against a country defending itself if you're the aggressor. It's grotesque language. It's inappropriate language. But more than that, these journalists in The Guardian presume to know the mind of the Kremlin. They presume to know why Putin has done something. Well, that's interesting. Do they have a direct line to him? Of course they don't. It's just made up bullshit. And it's lazy and it's incompetent. And frankly, it's more of the same appeasing, ridiculous nonsense. Now, an attack like the one that's happened over 3 days, it would have taken weeks, if not months, to stockpile the weapons, to produce such an intense attack, to get the teams in place, to choose the targets, if indeed much targeting has gone into it. And in fact, because so many cities were hit, the level of planning would have been enormous. So is this retaliatory to something Ukraine had done just the day before or a few days before? Of course it isn't. It's technically impossible. And yet the sloppy journalism that trots out this sort of templated, cliched rubbish, putting no thought into it, no consultation with experts whatsoever, it's dangerous. It's downright dangerous to say this kind of stuff.
It'd be interesting to know. Yeah, I think you get these people who are expert reporters on a certain topic, right? And that's all good and well. But then when you get probably one of the office members of staff just generically reporting on Ukraine, who is not just ensconced in the whole situation, I think there can be some real naivety in the choice of words, as you say,
Yes.
and it's very frequent among so many of them.
I heard it repeated by experts. You know, once this language gets out there and is normalized, I actually heard some so-called experts who follow the war intently, I won't name any names, also kind of repeating that language as well. Again, it is it's dangerous. It's downright dangerous to repeat that sort of stuff. But also, you know, the point I was sort of, you know, also going to make there is that far more likely as candidates for the strikes we're seeing are several things that happened. One was Trump's phone call with Putin, essentially saying he was washing his hands of the war. That gives Putin impunity to rub what he sees as a triumph in the face of the world, in the face of the civilized world. You also have Merz giving very hard, specific threats to Moscow, and they're not following through. Again, this could be a candidate. Putin saying, look at this, you're all words, you haven't done the actions, I've got complete impunity to do what I want. Also, we had a massive prisoner release. And again, you don't even have to be an expert in the field. You just have to go back and look at previous strikes. And there is a pattern of these kind of huge strikes following any kind of perceived concession that is made by Moscow. And of course, a massive prisoner exchange, the largest of the war, is exactly that kind of event. You would expect actually this kind of response from Moscow. That is a much better candidate than any idea of you know, it being in retaliation for something that Ukraine might have done. And also, it was the anniversary of the founding of Kiev on exactly the same dates. And again, they've struck Kiev on this anniversary every time through the full-scale war, and because this is the sort of you know, third year that they're doing this, they have to up the scale of it. So there are plenty of candidates for speculation as to why Putin is striking. The trouble is the sort of lazy journalism in this instance doesn't cover any of these, doesn't allude to any of these, and therefore doesn't furnish us with any understanding really of the toxicity of Moscow, nor the messages that they are definitely trying to convey with these strikes.
Just to let you know, I don't think you've given a title, a description, or a thumbnail to your video.
I haven't. I'm gonna do that while we're talking on.
While I witter on. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know whether the timing was particular or not. I've said this before. Russia is navigating a fine line whenever it does anything, because if it goes too hard against Ukraine, then it incurs the wrath in a more united way of allies, particularly the United States. It wants to be harsh enough. I mean, this is me speaking from a point of view as if I was Putin, right? Which is kind of.
But what's the evidence? You know, what's the evidence of incurring such a penalty? I mean, the response has been lackluster.
Well,
time after
so
time
that
after time.
You're absolutely right. So you know, they have often, you know, skirted too far to the towards the edge, and that has united Europe behind supporting Ukraine and united the United States into being more vocal. But what's happened since January the 20th is that the US becomes maybe a little bit more vocal. So today, for example, if we go to this, well, first of all, yesterday we had Trump being the most vocal against Russia that we've seen him, but then he spent the second half of the post slagging off Zelensky. And you're thinking, God, even when you've got the prime opportunity to go to town on Ukraine, you just use that as an go to town on Russia. Sorry, you use that as an excuse to go to town on Ukraine. It was absolutely, in my opinion, like horrific. But there you go. And then today I'll try and bring up that that tweet from yesterday. Actually, I'll see if I can find that, because I think that's pretty useful to have a look at. But I was going to then show you this latest comment. If I find Tim White's thread from yesterday, that will probably help me. There we go. Okay, so I will go to this comment from the Orange Man today, who said, what Vladimir Putin doesn't realize is that if it weren't for me, lots of really bad things would have already happened to Russia. And I mean, all caps, really bad. He's playing with fire. Now, so to some idiot in Trump's inner circle, this might seem like really ramping up rhetorical pressure against Russia. But for many of us, we look at that and go, this is an admission of being compromised. This is Trump or one of his aides admitting that Trump has been stopping pressure on Russia. I mean, that is direct.
So it's absolute admission of appeasement, massive appeasement. It's right there in the words. I'd go further, Jonathan. I'd say that the previous quote you showed us reveals something else. He cannot criticize Putin. In this instance, it's relative, even the harshness that Trump has adopted, it's still not directly accusatory. It's still sort of by inference rather than directly criticizing him. And what's more, every time he says something vaguely negative about Putin, he has to say something worse about Zelensky. This isn't just, I think, this isn't just any kind of animus he's got towards Zelensky. This is him signaling, I think, to the Russians, look, guys, you've gone too far. I've got internal political pressures. I have to be seen to be saying something. He is then signaling to the Russians, but don't worry, right? Because I'm going to dump on Zelensky more than you. This is him signaling to his handlers that he hasn't turned against them, but he has to do this. That's my inference. People are going to say that's kind of outrageous speculation, but unfortunately, there's a pattern here.
Yeah, so the one from yesterday, I've just finally found it. I've always had a very good relationship with Vladimir Putin of Russia, but something has happened to him. He has gone absolutely all caps crazy. Now, this is the very first time we have heard Donald Trump be explicitly critical of Putin, right? The only other time he was kind of implicitly critical of Putin was when he said, Vladimir, stop, right? As if that's like massive pressure on Russia. Oh, Vladimir, me old mate, you need to stop now. Please stop. Please stop all that killing of the civilians. So that's the only time he was kind of, scare quotes, implicitly critical. Here we've got explicit criticism. He has gone absolutely crazy. He is needlessly killing a lot of people, and I'm not just talking about soldiers. So like I've said before, and many people have commented, that he very rarely criticizes Russia for killing civilians. He talks mainly about soldiers, and this marks, I think, the second time he's mentioned civilians explicitly, which again, that's good news. There's a recognition there are war crimes going on, etc., etc. Missiles and drones are being shot into cities in Ukraine for no reason whatsoever. Okay, this is all sounding good. I've always said that he wants all of Ukraine, not just a piece of it, and maybe that's proving to be right. But if he does, it will lead to the downfall of Russia! Exclamation mark. And I'm thinking, yeah, excellent stuff. Thank you, Trump. Now let's go. What are you going to do about it? What are you going to do? What's the next step? Okay, what are you going to do? Likewise, President Zelensky is doing his country no favors by talking the way he does. Everything out of his mouth causes problems. I don't like it, and it better stop. This war would never have started if I were president. This is Zelensky's, Putin's, and Biden's war, not Trump's. I'm only helping to put out the big and ugly fires that have been started through gross incompetence and hatred. Oh, great. So that kind of setting it up, setting up the spike, and the spike is just basically Trump just having another whinge at Zelensky. So that was a real letdown. And then to then go on today and say, I've been the one that's stopping really terrible things happening to Russia is nothing short of absolutely disgusting. But he's probably interpreting this as some kind of power play on Russia. Now, then we hear this. So RT, this is how freaking naive and honestly amateurish that Trump is, because RT are taking the piss out of him. Like RT, the state media entity, President Trump warns Moscow, claiming Russia avoided really bad consequences only thanks to him. Putin doesn't realize he's playing with fire. Trump's message leaves little room for misinterpretation. Oh, until he posts the opposite tomorrow morning. Ouch. Ouch. But it's absolutely right. Like, if RT are taking the piss out of you for just flip-flopping all over the place, then you are probably flip-flopping all over the place, and you are not a threat to Russia whatsoever. And then Medvedev has come out and said, regarding Trump's words about Putin playing with fire and really bad things happening to Russia, I only know of one really bad thing, World War III. I hope Trump understands this, which is a very clever little hook for Trump, because we know Trump is obsessed with World War III starting.
Yes. He doesn't want it on his watch. He don't want to be held responsible for that, which some people could say, well, that is fair enough. But this is a common threatening tactic by not just Medvedev, but also Peskov and all the others in Putin's regime.
Can I just answer this? Simon Paul says, didn't Trump send manpads back in 2019? I've done a whole video on this where I look at the context.
We come back to this every time.
So I just want to put this to bed yet again. So obviously this thing that gets put to bed keeps getting out of bed and running around naked. Get back into bed. So Trump didn't really send them manpads. Congress sent the manpads. Yeah. So Congress had previously been complaining about there not being enough deadly aid going under Obama to Ukraine. They had ramped it up a little bit, and there were other things that were going. But what Congress, under particularly Senator John McCain, who was a Republican, who was a very, very keen supporter of Ukraine. In fact, he went out there controversially. But he was the one that got that put through Congress. All Trump did was sign it off. And as soon as he signed it off, he stopped it from going and tried to blackmail Zelensky by not giving him the deadly aid and saying, I need dirt on Biden in order for you to get this. And that's what led to Trump's impeachment, which is partly, I think, or largely why Trump hates Zelensky, because Zelensky did not give him the dirt. He didn't fall for the blackmail and actually, ruled with integrity. Trump hates him for it. And that is still bubbling on now. That is underwriting Trump's position on Zelensky. Trump should not ever be seen as in any way politically or morally responsible for those manpads going out, those javelins going out to Ukraine. That was just a matter of him signing off what Congress had already passed. So that was Congress doing it, and he tried to stop it. So in fact, you could say that he did his level best to make it so that they didn't get those javelins.
This is it, and people who post this, unfortunately, are either borderline in the Trump cult or are disingenuous trolls, I'm afraid to say.
No, I wouldn't. So not necessarily, and it might not be with Simon here. So
no, it might not be, but
also just don't know the details.
No, that's it. But there's plenty of evidence since, and again, no offense to Simon here, but Trump was the one behind the blockage of aid to Ukraine in 2023.
Yeah,
7 months. He worked through Johnson, 7 months, 7 or 8 months, 6 months of physical block, but of course it took months for weapons to come through. In that period, thousands of Ukrainian lives were lost that would not have been lost otherwise. Gains were not made by Ukraine. which could have been made, and that period allowed Russia to really entrench and dig in with defenses that were nearly, became impregnable. That really, in large part, led to the attritional warfare that we see today, plus the loss of some of Ukraine's best and most experienced fighters. That is to be laid at Trump's door. He already is dripping in Ukrainian blood. So to bring the manpads thing up and to ignore the subsequent behavior is to almost exonerate him for indirect mass murder, frankly.
Yeah. Yeah, and thanks, Simon. Yeah, I certainly wasn't having a go at you, but this is, and thank you for saying thanks. Didn't know the details, but this is how important, I suppose, the job of people like us are, but hopefully mainstream media, and actually mainstream media have reports on the kind of fact checking of that. But it also shows how easy it is for ideas to get out there. And you can understand these claims being proliferated because Trump still gets up on stage, literally on stage, and talks about how he was the one that sent the javelins, because of course he can technically take responsibility for that, for signing it off as president. It's like, here's what Congress did. I signed it off. I tried to stop it, but then we let it go because I got impeached, or they tried to impeach me, and then but several years later, you can go, I was the one that gave them the javelins, and he does that, and he literally talks about it frequently now as if it was all about him. So yeah, hey ho. One other thing concerning, I guess, American politics and aid to Ukraine, or sanctions on Russia more properly, is this chap Chuck Grassley. Now, many Americans will know Chuck Grassley. He's an aging senator, still hanging on there, but he is one of these people that occasionally comes out and very explicitly defends the notion of giving further aid to Ukraine or heaping on pressure on Russia. And here he said again, and weirdly, I've reported on this before, he speaks in like kids text speak when he does Twitter. I still think he thinks Twitter only gives you how many characters it used to give you. I forget what it was, 140 or whatever. I've had enough of, like the fact that he spells it like that is hilarious. I've had enough of Putin killing innocent people. President Trump take action, at least sanctions. Now, Chuck Grassley to be saying that, and we know that there's 82 senators now in a bipartisan bill that could be passed for like 500% tariffs on Russia and all these kind of moves to add, heap sanction pressure on Russia from Lindsey Graham and others. The senators are serious. They know their foreign policy. Generally speaking, they rule for like 6 years at a time. These guys are much more likely to be serious about American foreign policy. And so they will be largely behind support for Ukraine because they really know what's what. And they aren't so much a part of this kind of MAGA gravy train that is doing its level best to help Russia at every conceivable opportunity. Anton Gerashenko here said, thank you for supporting Ukraine, Senator. We can clearly see that Putin responds to diplomacy with increasing strikes on Ukrainian civilians and shows no inclination towards peace. It is necessary to maximize the combined efforts of all and forcing Russia to peace through strength. Yeah, and Lindsey Graham knows that. The senators know that, and we just need them to force that through Congress and send a signal, not so much to Russia, but to Trump.
The question is, will they do anything? I mean, I've seen these strong statements from Lindsey Graham, but it also sort of seems that ultimately, they're going to want to try and get Trump's buy-in to push this stuff through. Yeah. I find it difficult to believe they're going to try and push it through in spite of him. So at this point, I've been rebuked a little bit today by being overly negative in one of the, chats that we're involved in, especially by, Republicans who are pro-Ukraine who are, really lobbying for this change of behavior. And I simply pointed out, look, I'm not being negative. I'm simply going to wait for the action. I'm not going to get excited about words because let's face it, we've had strong words from Merz and Macron recently, and not just strong words. We've had specific deadlines and threats against Moscow, which the deadlines just seem to slip by and then not get mentioned. I mean, it's extraordinary weakness. It's actually mysterious. And even the announcement today by Merz that the let's say all restrictions are going to be lifted in terms of what distances the weapons can be used, the longer range weapons. Well, if you dig into that story, Merz himself has confirmed that one, actually, these restrictions are only nominal because in practice, privately, those restrictions have already been lifted. So this is a piece of PR, pure and simple. Because
well, he had to do a clarification later today to say that this is something that had already been announced ages ago. And,
exactly. It had been announced. And even if it's not specifically announced, that those sort of permissions have been given privately. Also, one has to wonder, one, how many of these weapons are still in the hands of Ukrainians? So how decisive is it? This would be classic. This would be very much like Schultz, wouldn't it? Announce something that has no material impact on the position of Ukraine. And this may well be the case. We also know from conversations with Ukrainians that HIMARS and other pieces of equipment are far less effective now than they were when they were delivered, when these restrictions are in place, because Russian hacking electronic warfare has got more sophisticated. And in fact, the precision targeting of HIMARS and other of these advanced weapons is not what it was. If anything, it's gone down up to 50% less accuracy than when they were first delivered. So again, it's, thanks, Merz. But now let's do things that actually change the tide of war.
So there are some interesting ideas coming out to do with the Taurus. So Tim White here says Russian mill bloggers say Ukraine already has Taurus missiles, which I've mentioned privately to a couple of people, could indeed have happened. This is far from proof, but Z fans claim that there are 2 military flights to Poland's border with Ukraine, and these ones were the ones that transported the missiles back on what that looks like 13th and the 19th of May. He says this is circumstantial evidence to back up a theory about Taurus. So one, Mertz's comments today, and this of course needs to be factored in.
Bryce, I would have seen those fly over actually if they go over my house. The flights from Bryce.
Really? From Bryce Norton? Yeah. Right, nice. Germany suddenly stopping publishing military aid lists. So this was something I reported about a week and a half ago, maybe 2 weeks ago now. So Germany, Germany were previously one of the most transparent nations for military aid, and German aid to Ukraine has its own website that was drawing a lot of the information from the German government website. And then 2 weeks ago, the German government decided to not publish data on what they were giving to Ukraine. And that's circumstantially quite interesting because that is a big change. Now, some cynical people are saying it just gives them permission not to give as much stuff.
That's what I was about to say,
But also could be because they don't want to be seen to be giving Tauruses when they're giving Tauruses. Although, people were arguing that there were examples of Germany giving stuff to Russia without publishing it. So they were very good at being very transparent, but there are certain things they also weren't transparent with. So they could have just done that with the Tauruses. Allies knowing Ukraine literally needs everything right now. So there are some rumors to suggest that Taurus are out there, but whether they are or not, I have absolutely no idea. But
it would make a change to actually. It would make a change to deliver a weapon system without, without virtue signaling and without announcing in advance what you're going to do. I mean, the element of surprise is actually rather good in war, apparently, according to some of the guests that come on the channel. Why not? Let's try that for a change.
Yeah. I mean, it'd certainly be useful, and we're hearing that the Netherlands have now given or will have given all of their F-16s in short order. So. That's good news, and not that it's definitely the case that the F-16s can fire Taurus. In fact, I presume whatever is going to fire the Taurus will have to spend some time adapting them. But what I then hope is actually that they've already been doing that for some time, and I hope that they're already. The Ukraine is training on, say, the Gripen airplane as well, and rather than these things happening sort of last minute, there's a bit of forethought going in, and anyway, it is I'm a bit down at the moment with regard to Ukraine's position in the war. So this war for me is like a roller coaster ride, and I go from high to low to high to low in quick succession. I'm in a bit of a low at the moment in terms of the Shaheds and ballistic missiles, and if they have stockpiled 500 ballistic missiles, then that, I don't know whether that's true, that's one of the rumors, then that is very, very scary for Ukraine, because they're at a time when they have, I think they've had some air defense systems that have been knocked out in the last couple of weeks, and in fact, probably the last year, really. And I think that's why Odessa has become better targeted by the Russians. And I think that's why Kiev has been more vulnerable over the last few months. And there were claims just over the last 3 days that the Russians have hit Patriot launchers as well. So, and you put that together with having fewer interceptor missiles for the Patriots. There was a claim that I reported on this morning, I think it was, or yesterday, that there are no missiles for the SAMP-T, the French-Italian SAMP-T, which is the other system that can shoot down ballistic missiles. And I think that there are still, clearly Ukraine are unable to mount any sizable offensives at all. Otherwise, they probably would have done. And I just think, Ukraine are in a very vulnerable position, and Zelensky probably does want a ceasefire. That's why he keeps talking it up. I don't think he's trying to trap. He probably is also trying to trap Putin into a corner by Putin not wanting a ceasefire, and then Zelensky seeming very keen on a ceasefire. And if Putin doesn't want it, then he can say, now we can hit them with sanctions. But also, I think Zelensky probably does want a ceasefire.
I think, if it can be in any way a secure ceasefire, then it's maybe not a bad thing at this point. Although it's dawning on Trump, something that we've all known for a long time, is that Putin isn't after a permanent ceasefire. In fact, we know he's not after a ceasefire at all. He thinks he's winning. And even if Putin were minded to have a cessation in hostilities, that would only be as an excuse to rearm, only as an excuse to get Trump to lift the sanctions so he could get his rearmament process on steroids. We're at a very dangerous inflection point where I'm going to do an episode in the next couple of days based on an article that's come out that basically looks at how much of the Russian economy has been converted to a war economy, and the scale of it is actually terrifying. Now, we talk a lot about the Russian economy being on the edge and on the point of collapse, but unfortunately, there's an alternative scenario here where it collapses as a market economy. It no longer exists as any kind of free market economy, and indeed, if it tried to get back into the kind of mainstream of market economics, it would almost instantly vaporize. But it could go down a Soviet command economy. In fact, it is going down a Soviet sort of command economy route, completely artificial, with all the numbers kind of spiked and invented, and people's living standard going absolutely through the floor. And yet, it's unlikely that there'll be resistance to Putin, and he may be able to keep that kind of entirely centrally planned, entirely militarized economy going for some considerable period of time. So I think we're at a point of extraordinary risk. And if Trump in any way lets up on the sanctions, and indeed if Europe don't and Britain don't continue to plug the gaps in sanctions and tackle the grey fleet, then unfortunately we're faced with an absolutely toxic, highly militarized, highly pathological society on our doorstep, whose ambitions actually have no limits, and the scale of blood and trauma and death that they can unleash on Europe is also unlimited.
There's someone I follow on. I didn't realize I'm on Blue Sky, and so I haven't followed them for some time because I used to follow them on Twitter, but I hadn't seen them so much over there. Prune60 does threads every day on the Russian economy, and it is, there are so many signs that the Russian economy is in an awful lot of trouble. And I think fundamental trouble, even if they do switch to a complete command economy. That's the frustration for me about Trump's inaction on Ukraine, is that 20th of January, if he had just whacked sanctions up, like Biden had thrown extra sanctions on Russia, really good ones, just before he left, and Trump came in, and if he had just continued that pressure, I think Russia would be in all sorts of trouble now. If he went to town on Russia's economy, I think there would be some serious issue. Like if we'd had 4 months of, really ramped up sanctions and whatnot, then Russia would be in trouble. But we hear today, and
it's not going to happen now, is it? It's not going to happen. I mean, if they took, and gave and used the 300 billion or whatever's left of that to help arm Ukraine and build up its defensive industries and purchase US weapons, including restocking the air defense systems, if they started to seriously tackle the Grey Fleet, if they seriously put secondary sanctions on economies still buying and dealing with Russia, if they stop buying Russian LNG, if there are still Russian banks that are operating on the SWIFT network 3 years in to a genocidal war, I mean, what more has to happen?
And the US is refusing.
Seriously.
The US is refusing the G7 to put down the oil price cap. You've got the EU wanting it to be lowered. You've got the G7 bar the US wanting it to be lowered from $60 a barrel to $45. This is a really
he's screwed at the level. I mean, at 45, he's absolutely screwed.
And yet the US is doing everything they can. Sorry, Trump is doing everything he can, his administration, to help Russia. Everything. Like, this is absolutely unconscionable that they would be holding out. And in the same way that they refused to call the war illegal in the G7 statement, and they refused to use the phrase support Ukraine in the G7 statement. So the US
Russians aren't stupid. Putin isn't stupid, right? He can look at all these words, and the news is going to be full of Trump saying things about Putin and how terrible he is. Do you know what? Putin is not going to care as long as Trump is helping to keep the oil price cap going. Trump is focused on the real things that are perpetuating his regime and his war. Words are not going to hurt his regime. In fact, as you've seen in Russia today, they can turn those around and in a sarcastic fashion, they can reinforce their position. So people really need to look at what's actually going on, not the froth that is reported in the media. And as long as Trump supports or prevents real harm happening to the Russian economy, then he is acting as a Russian asset. It is plain as day. So let's look at the actions.
So I find this fascinating. So the US State Department says Trump has many tools to help end the war. Spokesperson Tammy Bruce for the Pentagon clarified his recent Putin remarks. This is outrageous, this. So the Putin remarks that we saw just here, Vladimir Putin doesn't realize that if it weren't for me, lots of really bad things would have already happened to Russia. And I mean really bad things. He's playing with fire. And then the ones from the day before that show, that. So you've now got the Pentagon coming out on behalf of Trump and saying the Putin remarks weren't criticism. So I just said it's the first time we've got explicit criticism. And now Trump's spokesperson effectively is trying to say, no, it's not criticism. It's just a serious message from someone who's long fought for peace. Quote, Russia should take this seriously. Americans certainly do. It's just trying to walk back any kind of overt pressure on Russia. It blows my mind. I just want to bring up this comment here from Gen Consensus, who says, and I see this quite a lot. There are pro-Russian EU nations and other nations remain neutral and continue doing business with Russia. US hardly does any trade with Russia. So it's not the trade that the US does with Russia that's so freaking important. It's the sanctions on the ability to do trade. So it's the sanctions on the financial sectors, and it's secondary sanctions that the US is the best in the world at being able to affect. So the secondary sanctions on India and China that were having an effect around January and into February, and you started seeing Russian tankers not being allowed into Chinese and Indian ports. That was because the Biden sanctions were starting to hit, and the Treasury Department was enforcing those sanctions. We then hear today and yesterday that the US has stopped working with the EU to enforce sanctions. So the US is now stepping back and allowing Russia to break the sanctions. So the sanctions are functionally pointless. So it's not that yes, the US does very little direct trade with Russia, but the US in its control over global trade networks and payment systems and this and that. I know there's SWIFT in it, aside, but it's the banking, it's the banking sanctions and secondary sanctions that the US, I think this is why we need the US, and it's why MERS is. You talked earlier about the senators being beholden to Trump. Well, and MERS is very much like that, because the Americans are that important, and we're struggling to get away from this idea. The Europeans could stand on their own, but they'd be far less effective, and it would hurt the Europeans actually more than if the Europeans worked with America.
And Biden's not off the hook there. He was able to demonstrate the secondary sanctions have a huge impact. Well, that's
he came in
nice.
late with them.
He implemented them months before Trump came in.
Yeah.
Why were they not implemented years before, not months before? I hold this against Biden for his incredible weakness, and then to do these things at the last minute, knowing full well that they would be reversed when Trump came in. It is disingenuous in the extreme.
I don't think. No, I don't read it like that.
Towards Trump.
No. I don't think he did it knowing they'd be reversed. I think he did it as a last ditch. Oh my God, we haven't won the election. Now we've got to help Ukraine as much as we possibly can. We were hoping to incrementally put these in place over the next 4 years or whatever, which you can also criticize for. Yeah.
Oh, after Ukraine's disappeared, thank you for that. Yeah.
But it's definitely slow and definitely, beholden to escalation management.
Yes. Yeah.
A few questions here. One from a wee bit furry who had said previously that there's a chap called Jonathan Tapp that sounds very similar to you, Jonathan Fink. I don't know. I'm not aware. Hello, Fink, Jonathan Fink.
Is that an AI bot or something that's imitating?
No. I haven't heard the name Jonathan Tapp. Are you a Time subscriber and a regular commenter on Ukraine-related matter? I swear there's a commentator who is a linguistic mirror of your speech. Jonathan Tapp. So someone to look into. Anyway, thanks for the support, wee bit furry. And Goose Springsteen, I've asked similar before, but do you think the algorithmic pressures of YouTube incentivize sensationalism and overly positive analysis in the pro-Ukraine community? In life, nuance doesn't sell, sadly. Yes.
But I wouldn't say positive. It doesn't have to be positive, but sensationalist, absolutely. You could have, and sometimes negativity works. Like Russia's collapsing. You can do, and I know YouTubers who do this. They put that headline out every single time, like, "Oh my God," blah blah, end of the war, and this, that, the other. It's huge, and they attach those kind of headlines to every single freaking video they put out. And guess what? The algorithm picks up on it, and because people are like, "Oh my God, something big must have happened."
Yeah,
they just fall for it over and over and over and over again. So yeah, unfortunately, it's a shockingly awful algorithm, and it works on recency as well. So I know you do a lot of comment videos on what's happening at the moment, and yours are more in depth, I think more structured than almost any other ones out there. But the algorithm really doesn't work in favor of my channel, where I try to take a sort of historical dive, and at least half of my videos perhaps try to look in a more, with a focus of history and so on. Well, the algorithm basically, if that video hasn't performed in the first 24 hours, it's dead as a doornail. And that really counts against, because I can't deploy, sensationalist headlines. Well, I know you don't either, but I can't deploy sensationalist headlines because often there'll be sort of academics and so on who'll rightly take exception to that. It sort of demeans and diminishes their work. But also these videos should be relevant days, weeks, even months after they've been produced. They still have intrinsic value because they don't go out of date compared to, the daily Battlefront
mine
updates.
Do, yeah. So if you don't watch mine like 2 days later.
Yeah, you probably wouldn't watch yours a couple of weeks later. The trouble is the algorithm's not built for the way I produce videos, and if they don't perform in the first 24, 48 hours, they're kind of done, and it's then you're into a very, very sort of long tail. It completely works against the materials that I create, and it's frustrating.
Yeah, algorithm is pro clickbait. I've said many times to my audience that I will not do clickbait titles. I'm not a fan of that at all. So yeah, but basically my position, going back to sort of talk about sanctions, and thanks Goose, by the way, sanctions, is that the US absolutely needs to step up, the EU needs to step up, but we really should do it together. One of the reasons I've said that we should do it together, so lots of people are like, oh, the EU should go it alone. Problem is, if the EU goes it alone with sanctions and the US explicitly doesn't go along with EU sanctions or European sanctions, it then disadvantages Europe and advantages the US. So say you're sanctioning widgets and Europe says, right, we're going to put massive sanctions on widgets and we want the US to come along with us, and the US says, no, we're not going to sanction Russian widgets. Then it means that all Russian widgets can be sold through the US, and therefore the US benefits from that, and also they end up being able to get cheaper widgets, because now the EU and Europe has to source widgets more expensively from places other than Russia. And so European consumers spend more, American consumers spend less on these things, and they do the massive business with Russia and so on and so forth. And so actually, you know, there are other reasons why we need to work together with the US. We just can't go it alone very easily when you're talking about global trade, because you've already got China and India like bypassing that, which is why there's so much importance in secondary sanctions, which is that if you're a bank that's trading in these, then we'll hit you with those secondary sanctions. So anyway, just yeah, tuppence onto that.
I don't know if you can share that. I'm gonna send you a little link here if I can. But there's a lot of memes actually going on based on what Trump came out with, and the idea that he's explicitly admitted that he's been protecting Putin. Extraordinary.
Let me know where you're going to send that, and I'll have a look at them. I'll just show the peeps this. This is good news. Russia has been banned from the 2026 Olympics. So that's good. The International Olympic Committee has officially announced that Russian sports teams, including the national hockey team, will not be able to take part in the 2026 Winter Olympics in Italy. Decision is so that's Winter Olympics, part of the current sanctions measures introduced after the start of the full-scale invasion. So that is good news there. I'm thinking about boycotting. The Americans have got the World Cup, haven't they? And Trump's annoying me so much at the moment that they've got the World Cup, and have they not got the Summer Olympics? No, what they got?
Well, he's just been boasting about that. I should have been following that, but I don't know. But he's been boasting about having those two events and claiming that God has.
Yes, that was it. Yeah. Oh. So yeah, I might boycott them, which is a shame, because they're great. They're great things to watch. But
truly, God moves in mysterious ways if he's ordained anything in favor of Trump.
Through Trump, yeah, goodness me. And then there is, oh no, I won't do that. Yeah, well, actually, just one more thing on Trump that really, I mean, this is absolutely. I've got so much to say about Trump's America at the moment. I've got videos lined up aplenty to discuss stuff like this, but this is absolutely shocking. So the Trump administration has ordered US embassies worldwide to halt visa interviews for foreign students ahead of a new social media screening policy. Over 1 million new foreign students come to the US each year, contributing over $40 billion to the economy. This is another move that will only leave America weaker and more isolated. So basically, the social media screening policy, you cannot go to, you've already had people getting taken away at airports because they've had their social media stuff looked at. If you're not allowing foreign students to enroll in universities in America because they might have said something critical on social media, you are then living in a police state. I mean, like, if you don't think, like, I love the fact that so many people that were hitherto massive freedom of speech advocates. Oh, freedom of speech. I love freedom of speech. And as soon as Trump does stuff that are so overtly anti-freedom of speech, it's like, yeah. Oh, horrible. Foreign students who are critical against Trump. No. If you're a freedom of speech advocate, then you should be one now. What are you saying about stuff like this? Because this is insanely autocratic.
It absolutely is, and of course the hypocrisy is off the scale. It won't stop people from, claiming that the Trump administration has brought freedom back again, whereas all the indicators are that it has declared war on the free speech of those who disagree with it. Of course, those who fall into the sycophancy camp or the delusional camp, they're probably okay for now.
Yeah. Just want to make a reference back to the earlier conversation about is Goose Springsteen's question about how the algorithm favors sensationalists and sometimes positive reporting on Ukraine from people in the Ukraine war reporting community. That does happen the other way, as Fugu Narinda says. We also have to survive through a barrage of headlines on top newspapers, analytical agencies like JPMC. What's JPMC? OMG, Ukraine is so dead and hopeless. Please bury it now. That's happened an awful lot, and it was really frustrating. Things like New York Times, Washington Post went through a period of really, hammering out all these headlines that it was all over for Ukraine, and that really didn't help matters at all. So yeah, it has worked both ways. But yes. Any other things that have been floating your boat recently, Jonathan?
So there are, of course, rumors of a Russian summer-spring offensive. Now, last year, it was said they had 100,000 bodies to throw into the grinder. This year, it's supposedly 50,000. So that's kind of interesting. I mean, it could be because they think that Kursk is no longer under such threat, and they potentially have Korean soldiers protecting Kursk. So maybe 50,000 will have more of an impact. It may also be an indicator that Russia is struggling to wrestle up more bodies for the fight and the equipment to support them. That's certainly the speculation around it, but it is pure speculation at this point.
Well, the Washington Post today has reported that Russia is planning a major offensive with a main strike focus on Donetsk region. So we've heard, you were talking about the northern area where there's been claims that they're, and already you could say it's happening in Sumy as they are attacking down through northern Sumy. There are claims, and these come from Ukrainian commanders as well, that they're going to attack up in Zaporizhia. Up into Zaporizhia from the south, and then Donetsk as well, of course. And here the main strike is focused on Donetsk, according to Washington Post, believing that time is on his side. Putin's moved over 125,000 troops, but then it says to the borders there. So
That's right.
yeah, so but all these different numbers, yeah, do they really have
tricky.
that much in reserve?
Well, and even if they do, I mean, other Ukrainian reports say that, hang on a second, what Russia is really struggling with at the moment is getting their troops and their logistics, to have this build up, because as one of the comments said there, it's a target-rich environment. If Ukraine no longer has restrictions on the use of Western weapons on the territory of Russia, and that drones provide a high degree of transparency on the deep logistics lines into Russia, which it's rumored that they do, then actually having all these troops sort of mustering for an offensive is something of a risk that they become targets rather than in any way contributing to the front inching forward. So I don't know how confident Ukraine is, but I would say that at the end of the day, I expect we'll be sitting here, in 6 months' time or so, basically wondering what happened to that offensive, or speculating that it was simply, annihilated for minimal gains.
Yeah, I'm just trying to see whether Chuck Grassley said another comment, but anyway, yeah, we have heard previously, going back to the idea that some Ukrainian military personnel said, right, get ready, I think there's going to be attack up in Zaporizhia. We've seen throughout this war different commanders from different regions saying that the Russians are amassing near us. I think it's to be super cynical, possibly a ploy to get their own forces to have reinforcements thrown into them. Like, they're definitely attacking Zaporizhia, says commander of the Zaporizhia forces type thing. So it could be worth bearing that in mind. But yeah, certainly a worry that there are all of these places where they could attack, and it is not looking particularly good in certain places around Pokrovsk, to the east of Pokrovsk, around Toretsk, and coming up the to the south of Konstantinivka. So yeah, worrying times in certain places on the front line for the Ukrainians at the moment.
It is. We're hearing less, however, and this may not necessarily reflect reality, but we are hearing fewer reports or rumblings about Ukraine finding it difficult to rustle up manpower. We have fewer reports coming through of issues in rotations and giving Ukrainian servicemen and women a chance to have a few days, hours or days away from the front. It would be interesting to try and find out whether actually there has been improvement in Ukrainian manpower and what the mid to long term picture looks like there. I don't know who can furnish us with that insight, but I think that'd be an important one to keep an eye on. It may well be that Ukraine has passed the critical nadir of their sort of issue with troop numbers, and they may be incrementally sort of improving on that. And as you and I sort of know from either direct experience or the people we talk to, it does seem that the drone battalions are improving in terms of their scale, their training, the equipment available to them, techniques. There was a period where the Russians sort of fly-by-wire or fiber optic drones had really taken the edge, and it does seem that Ukraine is incrementally moving back into a more commanding position there. Again, it'll be interesting to talk to some people about that and the progress being made. Dimka, the wife of the husband of Irina, would be a great one to speak to if we can get him to come onto the channel, see if we can get his permission to come on. I think he'd be very eloquent on that. But also a video that I haven't put up on the channel yet, a very interesting discussion. Now, I had someone recently sort of posting a comment saying that I never report any negative stories, or I never report any stories that are critical of Ukraine, either civilian or military administration. Well, as you'll know, that's not exactly true, because there's plenty of stories and interviews where we talk at some of the systemic issues. But in this unpublished panel conversation that's coming out later this week, we actually go into quite a lot of detail with a active senior serving member of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, and we talk about the resignation of high-profile, I think it was an Azov commander, who basically said he was resigning because of the quantity of sort of stupid and inept instructions that are coming through from some in the senior leadership. So there are still some systemic issues, as we know, and this is a particularly interesting story where these have bubbled out into the open and led to the resignation of a senior commander and a public statement which is highly, highly unusual.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult because you want to be supportive of Ukraine, but also truthful at the same time, and you don't want to hide stuff from your viewers, not you, but one. And so there is that tension there. But I think hiding truth never leads to good outcomes, really.
No, hiding systemic issues is not helpful. I mean, I don't know about you, but I'll take a view. If there's a story or a conversation we've had, if that relates to let's say sort of corruption or internal issue, which of course needs to be fixed, but we get the impression that Ukrainians are on the case and that it is not absolutely existential to the war effort, then I'll tend not to draw attention to that if it's kind of being dealt with, and if the Ukrainian domestic press are kind of all over it. It's like, you know what, this is being dealt with, right? It's not necessarily going to help too much by sort of wallowing in the negativity of some of these stories, and it is already seeing the light of day to those people who can actually do something about it. However, it's my view that if you become aware of systemic problems within the Ukrainian military that is hindering any kind of path to victory, I think there is, you're duty bound to amplify those stories, because if they lead to a more efficient army, more efficient techniques, then it's absolutely critical to an eventual victory that these things are dealt with and not brushed under the carpet.
Absolutely. So what's your thinking at the moment as to what Ukraine desperately need the most from international nations, allies? What do you think is sadly missing?
I mean, it would have to be someone in the military to sort of talk about this. It seems that ammunition is no longer a critical factor. There are several schemes in place, including the one from the Czech president, to get ammunition to Ukraine. Now, obviously, we know that NATO is not producing enough, or it's being massively outproduced by a combination of Russia, North Korea, and Iran, which of course is concerning. But certainly Ukraine is not experiencing an ammunition famine. Air defense, which you mentioned earlier, I think there's a big emphasis there on Ukraine needing to have replacement systems, and of course the ammunition to replace in those air defense systems. Given the sheer scale and intensity of Russian attacks over the last couple of days, we have no idea, how many more of these attacks Russia can sustain, and what kind of supplies it's got. Munitions that can help take out some of these. Certainly, we've seen some correlating data earlier in the year and last year, where Ukraine was able to hit ammunition dumps, and then there was a significant scaling back of the attacks that Ukraine was experiencing, not because the intent wasn't there, but simply that Russia's logistics had been disrupted to be able to implement those attacks. So I think whatever can be supplied to Ukraine, which will help it to disrupt and attrit Russian logistics, ammo dumps, and all these kind of things, that has to be absolutely critical. I also think that we should not necessarily react when Ukraine uses its intelligence services to take out senior serving members of the Russian military. It's entirely within the rules of war, and the endless hand-wringing by so-called Western experts and media is not particularly helpful, especially when they describe these acts as uncivilized or unseemly and whatever. We just have to remember the Second World War. We did a lot of this stuff, and we thought it perfectly acceptable to take out senior Nazis where we could and when we could, by whatever method was to hand. There's a grotesque level of ignorance and hypocrisy in relation to Ukraine, who we expect to behave in a way that we did not behave and conduct ourselves in the Second World War. We knew that fight was existential to our survival, and we did what needed to be done. I think it's grotesque that Ukraine is constantly called out for doing what it needs to do, especially when that's perfectly lawful.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that Zelensky the other night came out and said, look, we need to ramp up, expedite, and in fact, I think he's given extra money to produce more interceptors for Shaheds. So they're working on their own ability to do that. There's going to be reporting on military aid. There's a new kind of, I think, an autonomous machine gun turret that the Ukrainians have developed for that purpose, but also their own ballistic missiles. He wants to do that. This has been long on the cards and it hasn't really materialized yet. But the Ukrainians, we've heard about the long Neptune missile and a couple of these missile drones. They definitely need to have long-range missile strike capability that can go deep into Russia without depending on other nations. And it's interesting. I'd be interested to know what you think about this. But the the Ukrainians are doing a really good job of smacking the crap out of Russian oil refineries and depots up until they stopped. It suddenly seemed to stop at a time when they were doing some pretty crazy damage. Do you think there's been pressure being put on Ukraine from allied nations?
Of course, and specifically the US. I think this very much coincided with the fake peace process, that this sort of pantomime of peace that we've seen unfold over the last couple of weeks. I think Ukraine and Zelensky, excuse me, Ukraine and Zelensky have known that this will likely lead to nothing, but given Trump's capriciousness, his clear behavior in sort of lashing out when he doesn't get what he wants, I think they felt it was prudent to ease up on these while that process was still, playing out, while the theatre of that process was still going on. I would hope that now that process is clearly dead and buried, that Trump has nominally washed his hands of such a peace process, and that Putin has demonstrably, slapped the Western world in the face and shown that he's not interested. I would hope that these strikes would resume. I think they were not suspended because Ukraine doesn't have the capability or has run out of targets. It was simply in deference to Trump's process, and not to be accused of being, the aggressor in this, which of course is absurd, but that won't stop those accusations being leveled at Ukraine. No, now they really should strike the things wholesale. Whether we've seen a lot of reporting on the strikes on Kiev. I've seen rather less information about the impact of the drones heading the other way from Ukraine into Russia, and I wonder what's been hit there. I kind of wonder what the effect was, and also we have to wonder how many of those drones were taken up by Russian air defense. This is scant information on that.
This is something I concern myself with every single day. And in fact, 2 nights ago, was it last night, as in the night that's just gone, and we end up hearing that Russians claim they shot down 96 or something, but during the night there were claims that there were literally hundreds and hundreds, like 400 drones in the air, Ukrainian drones. But then the next day you hear very little. And at the moment, for example, 112 drones. So from 9 o'clock to midnight, so obviously it's midnight in Russia already, air defense forces shot down 112 drones over Russian regions, according to the Russian Defense Ministry. That's tonight. Okay, so but then the next day we hear very little about successes. So either the Russians are just insanely good at OPSEC, or
which we kind of know they're not.
yeah. Or, well, in that case, I would suggest that almost all the Ukrainian drones are getting shot down. So, if I want to be totally positive about Ukraine, then to be as optimistic as possible, the Russians have good OPSEC, and they don't allow people, they punish people for releasing imagery, and these things also could be being hit in the middle of nowhere. So 4 o'clock in the morning, someone getting hit, having a big explosion out in the middle of nowhere is not going to garner too much social media attention. That's if I'm being positive. If I'm being very pessimistic, then Russia have really adapted and are able to shoot down these drones much more easily, and missile drones much more easily than they were. And I'm just not sure, because there are claims that there are loads of Ukrainian munitions flying through Russian skies, but I'm just not seeing enough damage at the moment. But then things do emerge. Like weeks later, you're like, oh, that thing was hit. Oh, it turns out that was hit. So, I'm not quite sure what's going on.
It's difficult to know, isn't it? I mean, certainly the pressure may be ramped up on people not to share this information, but it has a way of leaking out. So it may well be something else.
Yes. So someone asking, is it possible that US pursues peace process to keep the leash on Ukraine, because without peace being dangled, Ukraine could really damage Russian oil industry? Yes, I absolutely think. I mean, Jonathan Fink was sort of saying that there is pressure on on Ukraine not to hit the oil industry. And I think that, yeah, that something is going on. I think if they were on their own at the moment, Ukraine would be smacking the crap out of oil refineries.
That's right. And, you know, we have to remember this isn't the first time this has happened. During the US election,
True.
They eased up on hitting Russia. So if Ukraine was allowed to just do what they need to do, again, you know, things would be much closer to a Russian defeat. But unfortunately, Western political concerns in various sort of systems and places, unfortunately, especially the US, over the last 3 years have and even more, you know, over the last 11 years of war, have hobbled Ukraine and tied its hands behind its backs at pivotal moments. And we just have to, you know, say that this isn't just a Trump thing here. This is American politics has done significant damage to Ukraine's ability to defend itself.
Yeah, but Russians do need to watch out, because if you know, as Ron Filakowski here says, if Putin doesn't watch out, Trump might be forced to go all caps on him. You know, and if he goes all caps, you know, game over.
It's
yes.
game over. Yeah, I mean, this is the tricky bit, isn't it? Because if you come out and say, you know, Trump is a Russian asset, deep down, it's not just because he admires tyrants. That it's not just because he considers Putin a personal friend and believed fervently that his word would be enough to make Putin stop the war. Well, these things may also be true, but there's so much in Trump's behavior, so much in his language, that seems to hint at more than just you know, adoration of autocrats. And if that is the case, then this is not going to go anywhere. His words, even if they're in full caps, are not going to translate into actions.
Just to let people know, this was mentioned by someone in the chat right at the beginning of the video, but this is a UK government petition, so only UK citizens can sign this. So if you're American or French or whatever, don't bother. You have to be from the UK. It's a government petition. But transfer UK Warrior infantry fighting vehicles. UK has approximately 632 Warrior IFVs. 80 are awaiting near-term disposal, and the rest expected to be scrapped by 2030. The government should offer to transfer them to Ukraine. We think this would provide an increase in Ukraine's capabilities without incurring a cost to the Treasury. So if you think that's a good idea.
Why is it not automatic? I struggle here, and you know, we need someone who understands the ins and outs of this. But why have we not got a process in the Ministry of Defence that looks at every single piece of kit that is reaching its sell-by date, or kit that is stored that is beyond its expiry date? Why is not a unit that systematically just hands stuff over to Ukraine if it's deemed that these items could be operationally usable? And if they're not, then publicly says, we're not going to hand it over because simply it's a pile of scrap. But this requirement to have a petition, this requirement to remind the government that the largest full-scale war since World War II is going on in Europe, and that there is an existential threat to European democracy. Why do we have to go through this goddamn rigmarole every single time with this stuff? Are these people half asleep is my question.
I think there's been this long running thing about the replacement of the Warrior, and it's been really controversial, and it's been a procurement cock up that's been going on for a very long time. So that's probably confusing matters. But interestingly, France did a pretty good job of saying, so I don't know if how much you're on top of equipment and stuff, but you'll see on loss lists now, like VAB starting to pop up quite often on the loss list for the Ukrainians, and the VAB is an older French APC that is now just being replaced. And the French have said formally exactly what you're saying, Jonathan. So the French said, any bit of obsolete equipment, any equipment that's now being replaced in France, Ukraine get first dibs. So Ukraine are now getting all these old VABs, or they're decent enough APCs and whatnot, but they're being replaced by a brand new sort of whatever it is the French are replacing it with, and the French are just giving all their older kit to Ukraine in a very formalized way. Now, my guess is we probably are doing that in the UK, but I just think there's quite a bit of confusion going on with regard to what's actually happening with the Warrior and the upgrade. So yeah,
it's nice to guess, but can someone who actually know, come on and say definitively where there is or there isn't? Because, I'm cynical. I would tend towards the idea that actually there may not be such an automatic process. And in the third year of full-scale war, it would be pretty damning if there wasn't such a process in place.
Yes, yeah, it is a shame. I just, I don't think we have an awful lot of kit. I mean, we had, so to defend the British Army, we have given every single one of our AS90s, the self-propelled howitzers that we use. Every single one is now gone. So we're phasing that out and we're replacing it with the RCH 150, a Boxer chassis vehicle that we're co-producing with Germany, and we have now given like all of our self-propelled howitzers to Ukraine, and actually that was quite a significant number of them, and they're pretty decent, as in they're not like all singing all dancing like the Archer or the Caesar, but they're quite standard, fairly, I think, reliable pieces of kit that the Ukrainians have really appreciated. So we have done that to a degree, but yeah, I mean, our problem is we just don't have much stuff. But there you go.
And the replacement process is probably lagging massively
yes.
as well, that's the other thing that should have really been put onto steroids at the start of the full-scale war, and as we know, it wasn't.
Mitch Mazarol, thanks, buddy. JPJF, great to be catching this live chat. Thank you for all that you gents do. We are support Ukraine. Oh, I'm gonna have to dig that. Right, so he's referencing something that I love. There was this tweet that went out, and it's clearly a bot, right? Clearly some kind of or troll actually that hadn't quite got English right. It's something like I am Jill or something like this, and I am support England. And it's like, no, you are definitely a troll. I can't remember what the context was, so I started this thing off like I am support Ukraine, just as though we are support Ukraine is just a reference to that. Anyway, talking about bots, actually, and this is bots, trolls being human beings, bots being this. I mean, incredible bit of footage here to show you just quite how insane these bot farms are. So this is a whole kind of server room type thing full of, by the looks of it, those are all mobile phones, each one of them plugged into, I guess there are different ways of doing this. You can plug them into an individual person who like types a message and it goes out to all of them, or what's worse now is that you can have all of these accounts being run by AI, so they can produce effectively original content that just gets sent out to those thousands and thousands of profiles that are sitting on each of those mobile phones. So they've each got like SIM cards in that then are attached to a particular profile, and those profiles can then just pump out whatever the bot farm manager wants them to, and that's what we're fighting against. And I did a video the other day that was looking at the influence of bots and trolls on the Romanian election, the Portuguese election, the Polish election, and then looking elsewhere. And it's absolutely incredible how many accounts are not real people.
There's a lot of stories now about the hacking of various electoral processes, and unfortunately, not only is it not going to go away, the increase in this is going to be exponential, I think, over the coming months and years.
Yeah, it's really worrying. I was can't remember Cyabra. That's it, Cyabra, not Cybara. Cyabra's a company that looks into this. And Portugal election. So here, I'm really fascinated, just to remind my viewers and maybe let your viewers know some of the data that came from. So recently we had like a European Super Tuesday, a Super Sunday, I think it was. So where we had the second round of the second round of the Romanian presidential elections, the first round of the Polish presidential elections, and then the fourth snap elections, I think, in as many years, or third in Portugal for the general election. And Cyabra found for the Portuguese election manipulation here, the impact of fake. So what you need to know here is that oh no, it hasn't got all the. This is one without all the stats on. But anyway, here are some of the stats. Cyber found that 58% of the profiles commenting on Chega. So Chega is the kind of far right anti-establishment party, very similar in some respects to those other ones around Europe, such as AFD and Rassemblement National. But 58% of the profiles commenting on Chega's official X account were identified as fake, amplifying hundreds of pro-Chega comments across the official X accounts of the Socialist Party and the Social Democratic Party, so the centre-left and centre-right parties. Pedro Nuno Santos and Luis Montenegro, an average of 49% of people commenting on those profiles were fake. So that is a massive amount. And then what you do is you get people that comment, real people that comment on these accounts, like Alex Jones, right? For example. So Alex Jones is a real human being, but he's a crackpot conspiracy theorist, guy that owns InfoWars. And he will then amplify something to like millions of followers, but then he has a huge number of bots and trolls that are operating on his profile. So you get these different levels of fakeness. So you get the fake people on the original comments from whatever accounts you're looking at, and then you get some real people amplifying some dodgy thing to do with those real accounts, but that then gets spread by fake people. And yeah, or the real person spreads the fake tweet from blah blah blah, and so on it goes. It's a real challenge.
It's extraordinary, isn't it? You wonder how the money is made to be able to support that, or whether it is all being pumped in from external parties to manipulate, or whether there's a way for these operations to be self-financing. I mean, this is quite an interesting area.
Yeah, I've long said that Russia should have not gone to war with Ukraine and spent all of its money on bot and troll farms, and they would have had far greater effect on global politics and influencing the world.
Yes.
It's just absolutely, like even I said the other day, I wouldn't send a missile, like take a missile that they just built, $1 million missile that they could send into Ukraine, and think if they spent $1 million on trolls and bots, they get much greater return on investment than a single missile sent into Ukraine. I really think that.
If all their agents and assets were supported and still able to operate freely in Western countries, then ironically, we'd be in a far worse state in terms of European democracy. At this point, their actions are undermining their own propaganda narratives by being so absolutely, awful.
Yeah, I when I said InfoWars is owned by Alex Jones, I knew that it had been taken off him in a court case, and interestingly, The Onion took it on, but I think that was challenged, and I'm not sure if they definitely do, or they might do, but I know that there are loads of people that are trying to challenge that in the MAGA sphere. But so a bankruptcy auction. They acquired it with the support of Sandy Hook families, because Alex Jones famously said Sandy Hook was a false flag, and then he lost a court case to the Sandy Hook parents who are like, my child was shot in a school. This is not a false flag. I literally lost the child. Go and look at the freaking funeral and go. Do you know what I mean? It's like at some point reality butts up with conspiracy theories, and it took Alex Jones to claim a pretty heinous thing, that a bunch of elementary school children being shot at school was a fake false flag operation type thing, for him to be taken to court and lose, and then he thankfully was bankrupted, but he still seems to be hanging around saying egregious things. But anyway, I digress.
I mean, he ruined people's lives for many, many years. I mean, it was remarkable how he even got away with it over years and years. So many of the people that he leveled these false accusations at, had their lives destroyed. Again, after losing, their children, they had to move multiple times to escape sort of harassment and threats of physical harm. I mean, this is a thoroughly evil, despicable kind of person. The fact that these kind of characters are endorsed and enabled by MAGA and Trump should be enough for most people to find them revoltingly objectionable, but it unfortunately doesn't work that way.
But I mean, this is the problem we're facing. I know we often get onto this kind of topic, but when you can be, for example, so here you go. So when you can be either Trump himself or his state-run TV company, Fox News, and just outright lie to your audience, then you are just, we're living at a stage in world history where truth has been completely devalued, and we've normalized outright lying, not just like tactical little kind of like, oh, I've bastardized the truth a little bit, just obvious open nonsense lies. Like Trump comes on and says, inflation's gone down 90% and I've got the greatest polls that I've ever had, and stuff that's just so obviously utterly wrong that it's just like unfeasible. Here, Fox News host blatantly lied, saying Trump has re-enlisted 8,000 troops that were denied their service for refusing the COVID vaccine, and the actual number's 23. And he's just thinking, like, is really just lie after lie after massive lie. It depresses me. But yeah, there you go. I don't know what we do about that. Quite frankly, it's going to be such a massive job for us to fight disinformation on the scale that it's happening at the moment. And when you have the president of the most powerful country in the world just lying in such massive overt ways, I think it becomes thoroughly problematic. But there you go. That's all I have to say about that.
It is. It's just utterly corroding. And
yes, it is. So anyway, we're both obviously. Yes. So back to Ukraine. Is there any other topic that you think is worthy of our focus at all?
Well, I'd like to draw attention to one, the fundraiser that we're about to do or heading into, and I don't know if you're involved in the latest one, but Calf Ukraine. I've got another calf fundraiser going, so I advise people to check that out on the Calf Ukraine link. We'll put that into the description of the video. But yeah, we're raising more money to send trucks over, and that need has never been greater than it is now. We know that these trucks don't last necessarily that long at the front, weeks, months at the most. But if before they go or get taken out by drones, they protect the lives of the people driving them, then they'd have served their purpose. The other thing I want to draw attention to was the rather fascinating interview that I did yesterday, probably the most controversial conversation so far.
Before you go on to talk about that, can I just say that Ivan from Car for Ukraine, actually, there are trucks that last a very long time. So he's like, there's a truck there that we gave one of our first trucks 3 years later, still going. And so there is a whole range of, like, some trucks last for ages, some trucks don't last for ages, and then everywhere in between. But anyway, and
they're
so,
all example, useful. Every single one of them is useful.
Absolutely. But yeah, carry on about your video.
So this is an interesting one. I know you haven't had the chance to watch it yet. It'd be interesting to talk about it when you do. But this is difficult because the person who I interviewed, and at times he felt like he was turning the tables on me. He's a very sharp, very smart character. I wouldn't describe him as a Russian oppositionist. He's certainly a sort of contrarian, but he's more of a sort of analyst / talking head. But it's certainly controversial because at one time he was the speechwriter for Putin. In 2012, he endorsed Putin for president. In 2014, he condemned the invasion of Crimea. But if you go all the way back, he was the anchor to one of the first and most significant, I think, news programs during Perestroika. So extremely well known for several decades. He also founded a nationalist party, which was the progenitor of later government created sort of, Hitler Youth style parties. He produced a sort of very odd, supposedly anti-war film that actually was sort of pro-imperialist, pro-First Chechen War. So one could almost describe it as a genocidal piece of propaganda. He was as he himself admits, was a Nazi for a while, a Russian racist Nazi back in the 90s, early 2000s, rather. And yet he's one of the most vocal critics of Putin. So this is a very controversial character, and many people who watched the channel have reached out and said, you do know who he is, right? You do know that this is going to be quite controversial, and absolutely. And in fact, before doing it, this is rather unusual because normally I just sort of run with whatever interviews that I want, and I do my own background research on the people. And usually that sort of pans out quite well. In this instance, I reached out to so many people, Ukrainians especially, to say, look, have you heard of this guy? And do you think we should, that I should do this interview? And it came back 50-50, quite literally. 50% of the people saying, don't touch this, don't go near it. And 50 saying, this is risky, but if it's handled in the right way. And I think I might do an entire episode of my sort of news bites, just kind of looking at this character and what he's done and what he's saying now, because now he's sanctioned by the regime, him and his wife. They're in the unique position as being classed as an organization, a terrorist organization. That's him and his wife. All their property has been confiscated. He's been granted Ukrainian citizenship. And this is one of the few so-called Russian oppositionists who I think Putin would rather like to take out if he could. And his criticism, and he's a very flamboyant character. He's very acerbic, very sarcastic, and his language is kind of extremely flamboyant and literary, which is an absolute nightmare because the AI can't figure out how to translate it. So I have to spend a lot of time putting the subtitles together. But his criticism of Russian fascism and how it's merged with traditional Russian imperialism is amongst the most, I would say, penetrating, acerbic, acidic, vitriolic, and yet incisive criticisms of Russian racism. And it's truly disturbing to listen to the way he describes what's going on and the Russian mentality behind it is truly terrifying. And this is exactly the reason I wanted him on the channel, because as he says, there's far too much optimism, even in our community, where we bemoan Russia's actions, where we accuse them of terrible war crimes. There is still, I would say, a veneer of optimism. There is still a process where we overlay some of our own assumptions onto Russia, where actually they have no place. And I think this speaker he's one of the few, if not the only, who can try and really tear down some of those assumptions and get us to look at Russia in a different way. And when we do, I can guarantee you it is absolutely terrifying. But also, if we internalize that, if we recognize what we're dealing with, then hopefully we would take the commensurate actions to defeat Russia. And his point is that we haven't yet decided to defeat Russia because we're not scared enough, because most people, even who are pro-Ukraine, do not understand the scale of the threat that Russia represents to our countries, our system, our values, everything.
Does he still live in Russia?
Oh, God, no.
Yeah, I was going to
No,
say.
he'd be no. He's
Yeah,
been sentenced in absentia to 8-year
yeah,
prison sentence,
right.
and all his property confiscated, and he's declared a terrorist
Yeah,
organization. So no,
that
he's.
makes
I mean,
sense.
not only can he not live there, that he'd be one of those people where I rather suspect they do him in if they could get their hands on him.
Yes. Yeah. Well, that's something to look out for, and that's out. You've got that on your channel already. What's his name?
Yes, he's called Alexander Nezvorov or Nezvorov.
Yeah. So as Cheryl
Yeah,
said, Nevzorov. I haven't got to that one yet, but that
yeah.
sounds like it could be an interesting one to
And something else
watch.
that's interesting. I mean, not only did he condemn the invasion of Crimea, he also predicted, and this is, bear in mind, this is 2 years after he actually supported Putin's regime. Actually, was a sort of key figurehead as part of that sort of, and he helped to create Putin's hybrid information autocracy. I mean, he's one of the absolutely key figures in building this modern Russia, and he openly, talks about that. But just 2 years after the 2012 controversial re-election of Putin, he is condemning the government and saying that the invasion of Crimea will lead inevitably not just to tyranny, but to Russia becoming a warlike state, almost a Hitlerian path. So it's extraordinary outburst, and I would say predictive power. And then in 2021, he produced what is now quite an infamous video where he predicted Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And he also predicted how catastrophically wrong it would go. He predicted the logistical and strategic screw-ups in the Russian army. He predicted the extreme barbarism and the massive war crimes that would take place. He also predicted that Ukraine would fight back. And unlike the predictions of most analysts, he said that Ukraine would not be broken by it, but it would reveal a lot of the deep sort of corruption within the Russian system, the incompetence, brutality, and so on. It's an extraordinary video, given that it was made in 2021. When most people didn't believe that full-scale war was at all possible.
Definitely one to watch, as all of yours are, really. I wish I had more time in the day. Just to let people know that there are many Ukrainian drones flying into Russia as we speak, so that's good news. I've started seeing more and more of these images coming out where they are tracking the Ukrainian drones, and interesting to see how many of them there are quite often. I'm just enjoying a little bit of white port while we meander towards the end. I just wanted to go through a little thread from Elliot Higgins. So we're talking about truth. Sorry, I'm just going to pivot back to this kind of disinformation topic. Because again, here Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, says, I inherited a 6.7% deficit to GDP from the Biden administration, which was the highest deficit when we are not at war, not in a recession. Fact check, in 2021, the Biden administration inherited a 14.9% deficit to GDP from Trump's first term, and we weren't in a recession. In other words, like, just the lying is so just massive and obvious that it's at ridiculous levels. And Elliot Higgins does so much interesting stuff. So he's a guy that runs Bellingcat, and he does an awful lot of stuff on disordered discourse, which is really, really worth looking at. And here he's sort of looking at disinformation, but also this inexorable march towards autocracy, particularly in the United States. So Elliot Higgins here says, democracy isn't dying quietly. It's being suffocated by noise, lies, distraction, and systems that profit from confusion. But we're not here to mourn it. We're here to fight for what comes next. This isn't about political decay. It's a full spectrum failure. Truth is optional. Debate is poisoned. Power is untouchable. And the worst part is by design. Platforms feed us what keeps us scrolling. Institutions dodge accountability. Bad actors flood the zone and call it freedom. Oh, yeah. The result, a society that can't think straight, act together, or hold the line. But this isn't inevitable. We know what democracy needs to function. Verified truth, real deliberation, actual accountability. That's the baseline. That's the battle. But this isn't inevitable. We know. Sorry, that's the same one. So
good,
no,
good
democracy.
Quote. Very strong.
Yeah. So no, democracy isn't dead. It just smells funny, but it won't fix itself. We build what's next by showing up in schools, in investigations, in every system that shapes truth and power. We don't need to wait for permission. We need to act like democracy is ours to reforge, because it is. I'm tired of waiting for someone else to fix it. The politicians, the platforms, the experts, they're not coming to save us. It's time for us to take command. Democracy isn't something that happens around us. It's not a vibe. It's not a setting on a system. It's built day by day, action by action, voice by voice. When we investigate corruption, we build democracy. When we teach others to think critically, we build democracy. When we challenge lies, demand answers, organize change, we are democracy. These systems are rigged to make us feel powerless, disconnected, confused, alone. But every time we act with clarity together, we reclaim ground. This isn't just resistance, it's construction. Not a nostalgia project, but a future project. The goal isn't to go back. The goal is to build a democracy that can survive now. And we're not starting from scratch. We've got tools, we've got networks, we've got truth, method, and each other. That's enough to start anything. And remember this always. And he leaves with a Frank Zappa quote. I have an important message to deliver to all the cute people all over the world. If you're out there and you're cute, maybe you're beautiful, I just want to tell you something. And there's more to more of us ugly motherfuckers out there than you are. There you are. So watch out. Hey, so watch out. So in other words, yeah, if we stay together and, you know, keep focusing on the truth and hold people accountable, then there is a hope. But we've got to work hard at it, and it's really freaking important. You know, freedom is not free. You know, we have to work hard at it. It costs in time and effort, blood, sweat, and tears for many.
And there's so much, you know, stuff going on out there, which is fantastic. But at the end of the day, you know, this also requires every individual in a democratic society to get more involved. You know, voting is not mandatory, but I think in people's minds it should be. Membership of parties is not mandatory, but I think, you know, people, if they don't want to see populists coming to power, then it is time to pick a party and join in, and not just think, you know, everything's screwed and that there's no hope. I think people need to come at things with a sense of agency and a sense of outrage, not the nihilistic sense that they should sort of curl up their toes and give up, because that is never the solution, especially not to the problems that we've talked about in this episode.
Yes, and someone just mentioned Thomas Patton here saying how many. Oh no, not that one. About pardons. This is something I'm going to talk about in one of my videos, upcoming videos. He's just pardoned some absolutely egregious criminal people. It's just, oh my goodness, horrific stuff. So yeah. Anyway. I'm glad someone noticed the white port. I am indeed drinking white port, the Martha's White Port, Port of Leith Cask Partners. That is a lovely, lovely white port. I got that off Mark from the Little Whiskey Shop. Now, the Little Whiskey Shop, I often talk about Mark. He came out with Jonathan and I to Ukraine to drive the trucks out, and Mark has a little side hustle called the Little Whiskey Shop. He's just stocking Ukrainian wines. I've just bought a bunch of Ukrainian wines off him, and I think 10% of each bottle goes to Ukrainian charity. So if you can find, if you're in the UK and you want to buy some, they've got all sorts of spirits that they stock, but also Ukrainian wines. Go and check them out. So the Little Whiskey Shop, Stockbridge.
Lovely chap and a fantastic shop.
Cheers. So just one more thing, I guess, before we sort of wrap things up near enough. Two things, actually. I just mentioned Chega, and I meant to say this the other day, actually. So thank you for pointing this out. although Chega is far right, so the Portuguese far right party, and they are still, at least officially, strongly pro-Ukraine. So this is quite a rarity. It does happen. Giorgia Meloni is an example of someone further to the right being supportive of Ukraine. So Chega as well. They'd not have so many votes if they were pro-Russia, since this would be extremely unpopular. So that is one good news thing about them in Portugal. So thanks for that verification or qualification. Michael Vuchar, thank you so much, buddy. Here, have some money to pay for the vacation, or at least a pint. Talk about the king. So I don't know much about this yet. So Michael Vuchar, strong Ukrainian advocate, obviously you can see by the surname, but also living in Canada. The king has been in Canada today as kind of the head of state, the King of England, the King of Great Britain, and the UK. And he is out there, and he has just given a speech where I believe he had a little poke at Donald Trump, because obviously you can't take Canada without going through the king. So there was I think he spoke. Did he speak to Parliament, the king? Anyway, because I've been away, I've not seen the news and not heard about this. So any info on that would be great, Michael. I don't know. Do you know anything about that?
Not really. I tend to skip the old royal stories, unfortunately. But yeah, if it relates to Canada and Ukraine, I mean, that could be quite interesting. So I'll take a look. But I tend to tune out, especially if it's Harry and Meghan and God, all that kind of stuff. Life's too short.
Ross Phillips.
And I'm too Republican.
Yeah. Ross, who I met again out in Kiev when I was at that. Ross, I'm gonna have your tea. I bought a special tea strainer to have, because it's loose leaf tea. Got me for some Lviv tea, I think it was. So I'm gonna have that next week. I'm gonna get onto your tea next week. It's been that long since you gave it to me, but thanks, mate. I have this issue as well.
What's Ross saying here? What's he saying? Is he saying that we're somehow senile? I mean, what?
No. So this is a problem I have. So when I listen to someone like, I take for example Dom Nichols on Ukraine the Latest, right? So I listen to Ukraine the Latest on like 1.8 times speed, and you get used. So because I listen to them all the time at that speed, then when you hear them speak live, so if I replay a clip from Ukraine the Latest where they're speaking at 1 times speed, I think that they have had a stroke, or there's something there's something wrong with them, because you're attuned to 1.8 times speed, and then normal speed is all wrong. So I get that, Ross. I really do get that. First time I've listened to you guys not in 1 times 1.5 speed in months, and it sounds like you're both having a stroke. I'm trying to adjust. If you want, I can speak much quicker, and then this will hopefully make you feel like you are listening to me at normal speed. So there you go. Thank you, Ross. Anyway, that is an issue I certainly suffer with as well. So anyway, thanks for hanging out, Ross. Appreciate you and all the people in the live chat. Thank you. So apparently the king said something about the War of 1812, went out of his way to open Parliament in Canada. But I don't know if the king was fantastic, apparently. So that's really good news. I'd love it because of course Trump is touted to do a state visit to the UK and meet the king, and that was one of our sort of bargaining tokens for Trump that was used well. But then the Zelensky thing happened. And it all kind of went out the window, and everyone was saying, "Oh, we should rescind the offer of a state visit and meet the king." But Trump is due to meet King Charles, so if King Charles is making veiled kind of criticisms against Trump, I think that makes for an interesting scenario when Trump does come over. But there you go. What, my good man, are your sort of final thoughts on things?
Final thoughts is it's been for Ukrainians a brutal and bruising week. I think in some ways the intensity of the barrages have shocked Ukrainians, despite 3 years of going through this. But what hurts even more is the endless weakness of Trump. The fact that the criticism of Putin is not followed up by action, the fact that the criticism of Putin is almost always accompanied by in criticism of Zelensky that's of a greater intensity. The very idea that you attack the victim and not the perpetrator over and over and over again, that is psychologically wounding. That is psychological abuse, and it needs to be called out and not just sort of glossed over. We can't just say, "Oh, well, that's Trump and that is his manner." It is abuse of the absolutely worst kind. It's despicable. It's revolting, and if none of this is followed by action, then all it is abuse, and yeah, it's disgusting, and yeah, needs to be called out.
I'm so sick of that, man. Yeah. Goose Springsteen, we'll make monarchists out of you guys yet. To be fair, right, I'm fairly ambivalent on the monarchy. So I do not agree with the unmerited sustainment of privilege. I think that is unjustifiable unless there is an overall benefit to having the royal family. So if there's a PR and I don't know, tourism net benefit of having a monarchy, as long as they don't have overt explicit power, which I don't really, I don't mind our monarchy too much. But as soon as they start being more effort or cost much more than they're worth, then I'll be like, yeah, no.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of like, yeah, whatever.
I mean, yeah, I would have to admit that under the Queen, it worked pretty well, and that's because of her extraordinary understanding of the system and the limits of her own power, and the sort of soft influence she was able to bring to bear. And it's a challenge, isn't it? When it works, it works. And you could say that a democratic system might be more stable and more reliable, but of course, democratic systems are also entirely vulnerable to individuals. And we see that even the best constitutions, even the best checks and balances can be corrupted and are corruptible, and also are prone to have their authority degraded through weak leadership. So yeah, a presidential system may be on paper that's better. In theory, it's better than the sort of the monarchical sort of inheritance by birth system we have. In reality, it worked reasonably well over the last sort of 50, 60 years. That doesn't mean it always will work well and continue to function. It's very much beholden to the whoever is filling the crown, as it were.
Final question for you before we go. Evening, guys. I had a question for Jeff. In his opinion, will Biden be remembered as saving Ukraine from losing completely, or will history see Biden as a hindrance to Ukraine's victory?
Obviously, history will determine very much how we look back and review those events, and more information will come to light. We also don't know, what level of partisanship will be brought to that historical record. It won't necessarily be immune from partisan reckonings, but I think a fair account would have to say that the support that was provided helped to prevent Ukraine from being overrun, and I would have to be honest in saying that, but that the scale of supply of weapons, and indeed the strategy behind those weapons, was entirely meant to allow Ukraine to stand and bleed rather than defeat Russia. And I think history will judge that as a failing, as a lack of imagination, as a failure of strategic thinking. I think it unlikely that Ukraine will fall. Therefore, it will not judge Biden as harshly as it might do if Ukraine, had fallen in the fullness of time. But I think it's very unlikely at the moment that Russia is going to be able to deliver any kind of knockout punch. Therefore, Biden gets off the hook a little bit, but the price of that strategic failure is enormous, and we don't yet know what the full price is. Let's face it, Biden will be judged not necessarily even by Ukraine standing or falling, but by what happens to Russia next. If Russia goes on to carry on rearming, if it goes on to challenge Finland or invade the Baltics, or goodness, launch some form of World War III, or actually dramatically escalate the sort of arson, sabotage, and attacks on the West, we don't know where this is going to end up. And therefore, judgment of history is very much contingent on what happens in the coming months, even years.
Yeah, I think it's going to be largely contingent on what the details that emerge will be as to what really happened in these decision-making scenarios. So I'm going to be, I don't know. I think it's easy to fall down on either side with Biden. Sometimes I'm quite critical and think, well, it was all too slow and all too scared of escalation. But on the other side of the coin is that actually they did come together and they did help Ukraine out with a phenomenal amount of stuff. And actually, when you compare what they were doing then compared to now, I was writing a list today of all the things Trump hasn't done and all the things he has done to screw over Ukraine. And it's disgusting. So we can slag off Biden all you like. Trump is infinitely worse. And I say infinitely because
right, yeah.
zero compared to something is you multiply, you can, that's a factor of infinity, right? So,
it's not great compared to absolutely terrible. I might have compared it recently, and of course, Trump has released some funds for apparently $50 million of dollars of air defense systems, which of course is a tiny rounding error compared to what Biden provided. And the example I used is that if Biden was giving you, half the dose of antibiotics you would need to rid yourself of virulent disease, it's not brilliant, because by doing so, you haven't killed off the disease, but you've given it the space and time to become more toxic, more virulent, and more deadly. You might have saved the patient, but it's engaged with the struggle with a far more virulent disease. Okay, so that's not brilliant at all. What Trump has done recently is no more than homeopathic remedy, which is a couple of atoms per million part of water. It doesn't bear comparison at all.
Meanwhile, saying, I hope you die. So yeah,
unless you're a cult believer in that kind of thing as well. I mean, I don't know what proportion of Trump voters also believe in homeopathy, but I mean, in my book, it's not a cure in any way.
Yeah. Well, look, I've really enjoyed my couple of days away, but I've also really enjoyed coming back and speaking to you guys. I had a wonderful time in so many amazing pubs in Dublin. I mean, we mainly just spent a lot of time in Temple Bar at these incredible pubs, and listening to Irish music. Just the culture of these pubs was absolutely amazing. Just really endeared me to it. I mean, I've been to Dublin before, but when I was a student. But yes, not for a long time. So it's a really great experience. But it's good to be back with you guys. I'm going to leave you with the news that Google VO3 is scary. So I was just talking about disinformation earlier. Like what we are now experiencing in terms of Google VO3 is insane. Like the tone of the language, this is all AI generated. Some people will have seen a viral video, for example, of a kangaroo not being allowed on a plane. That was AI generated. We are cooked, says Future Stacked. Google VO3 just broke the internet. 10 wild examples. Nothing is real anymore. Street interviews are not real anymore. So you've got, all of these are just, I mean, you can't hear what's going on, but the voices are AI generated. The interviews are AI generated. You've got a meme coming to life. So the famous meme here now can bring that to life. You've got, random interviews in anywhere, any context. You've got animation videos that you can make. Now here, this is interesting. A $500,000 pharmaceutical commercials can be made with $500 in VO3 in less than a day. So, is this just going to affect people's jobs? You can just create, you don't need advertising agencies and whatnot. VO3 generating real world locations in a game style. You've got this woman, this one is all about the tone of her voice, just like wild different intonations that they can create. You've got, you know, Will Smith eating spaghetti, but of course, any famous people. We had the other day, I think it was Emmanuel Macron, Keir Starmer, and Friedrich Merz, I think was it, like dancing around in their pants or something, was a video that, you know, was AI generated. And here, the last one, fake news. And you can do that with an actual news like setting. So if you put that in with BBC News or Fox News or CNN, like you can generate, like we are speaking to my partner about this over the week, over this last couple of days, saying and I was showing her some AI videos saying we are living at a time now when you just simply cannot know what's real and what isn't. And it is just really, really, I think, dangerous epistemically. And that kind of goes back to what Elliot Higgins was saying.
And we have to remember that the people immediately think that the greatest risk is believing lies. And of course, there is a risk of that. The greatest risk actually plays to Russia's techniques. And that is not that people necessarily believe lies, but they start to disbelieve everything, that they start to think there is no such thing as objective truth, and they distrust all evidence of their eyes and ears. Well, that is a classic totalitarian trick. So we might be in a new era of this kind of stuff, but unfortunately it harks back to techniques that are very, very old and certainly go back to Nazi Germany and the operation of modern Russian disinformation. And that is to disbelieve the evidence of your eyes and ears, disbelieve the evidence of the people around you, disbelieve reality. It will potentially drive us towards a new level of informational nihilism, and that is extremely dangerous for democracy, social cohesion, and trust, as well as agency. You know, it's like acid, hydrochloric acid, being poured over people's sense of their own agency in their political systems.
Yeah, surprise Mother Trucker says, work for a large company, AI screws stuff up all day long. Yeah, but we are in the infancy of AI, really. Like, if you think of the leaps and bounds in the last 3 years in terms of what it can produce visually and audially as well, honestly, you know, another 3 years and those mistakes won't be being made. Like the Benny Pope was hitting me up with turning some of my books into audiobooks. I'd love to read out some of my books to do my voice for audiobooks for all the kind of 15 books I've written or whatever. But I just don't have the time. But he generated an AI voice using my voice as an input, and it is me reading. And I'm very close to just getting AI to do my voice, just because I don't have time, but it just hasn't quite got the intonation right. So some of the I use quite complex sentences in my writing, and it can get quite involved, and the stresses need to be on point. And if AI hasn't quite got that, I'm not happy with that being attached to my book. But it's not far away, and the fact that he can produce just like that my voice in AI is scary and amazing and scary.
It could get you to read out all sorts of things. You know, I've had a revelation that you know, I love the Kremlin now. You know, it could be used for all sorts of malicious purposes.
100%. Well, look, it's a pleasure being back in the saddle. I've had a lovely couple of days away. You've been in Ukraine, and you haven't actually spoken about that. So next time we'll have to talk about your experiences. But yes, thank you very much to the audiences for having such lively live chats. And thank you for your support of the channel. It really does keep the lights on. I really appreciate that. Thank you. And yeah, so I'm trying to go here. This is my famous long goodbye. Cheryl, report from Ukraine obviously uses an AI generated voice. The pronunciation is weird. Yeah, but I've wondered about that. People have said that before, but he sometimes pronounces a place name several different ways within the same video. But then that makes me think, well, that probably is AI.
It's not
a human
smart.
wouldn't. I don't know.
I
don't know. Yeah, I don't know. could be right.
It doesn't have a memory. It's not built in with that. Unfortunately, you know, having a memory to introduce that kind of consistency would be a good idea. It'd be sensible, but you know, each of these additions requires, you know, a significant step up, also in terms of the amount of computer bandwidth that it requires. So of course they're going to have a trade-off, I think, between that sort of, you know, that accuracy and whether it's economically viable to add the additional, you know, servers and computing power that'd be required to do that.
That's kind of what Viggo Holmsen's speaking to there. So yeah, good synthesis. Well, thank you very much. I guess all that remains to be said is Slava Ukraini, my good man.
Heroyam Slava, it's good to be back with you in the saddle. We'll do this again soon.
Yes, absolutely. Keep your eyes on, of course, what is going on in Ukraine. Spare a thought for those who are suffering on a daily basis. And fingers crossed that Trump can remove his big orange thumb from his fat orange ass and do something for Ukraine rather than string them out to, well, throw them under the bus, actually. But it's sad to see, but when there is so much that could be done, and let's hope that Europe can step up as well, even if the US don't. Okay, take care, my good man, and thank you to everyone who has been listening to Pips.
Thank you to your wonderful audience. Yes, speak soon.